Imagine you're starving. In front of you are two berries. One could save you. The other could make you seriously sick. No labels, no supermarkets, no internet. So how did ancient humans know what was food and what was dangerous? Here's the surprising part. They didn't always know. There was no magical instinct telling humans what was safe. But they weren't completely clueless. Our ancestors already had millions of years of feeding experience behind them. Then came an obvious clue. If animals kept returning to the same fruit, humans could notice. But there was a dangerous catch. Something an animal could safely eat might still be unsuitable for a human. So humans gathered more clues. Before eating something unfamiliar, sight and smell could provide useful information. Humans are especially sensitive to bitterness, and bitterness can sometimes warn us about potentially harmful plant chemicals. Except bitterness wasn't proof. Safe foods can taste bitter too. Human senses gave clues, not guaranteed answers. But humans had something far more powerful than smell, taste, or watching animals. They had each other. A prehistoric child didn't need to discover every food personally. They could simply watch what experienced adults collected. Which roots to dig, which berries to pick, which plants to avoid. Every lesson could save the next generation from learning the hard way. One person remembered the berries, another knew the roots, someone else knew the season. Together, the group knew far more than any individual, and the most experienced foragers carried something incredibly valuable, years of memories about where food appeared and when. But there's still one uncomfortable question. If everyone learned from someone else, who discovered a completely new food first? When humans moved into new environments, familiar rules became less useful. New landscapes meant new plants and new uncertainty. So instead of trusting one clue, humans could combine several: appearance, smell, experience, animals, and knowledge from other people. But there was never a perfect prehistoric test. Every unfamiliar food still carried some uncertainty, and sometimes humans got it wrong. If someone felt sick after eating a particular plant, however, the group could remember what happened and connect the warning to the food. Now, one person's mistake could protect everyone else. Avoid that plant. Leave those berries alone. Remember what happened. And that's the remarkable part. The person who learned the lesson didn't have to be the last person who remembered it. But humans eventually discovered something that didn't just help them find food. It could actually transform food itself. Cooking didn't just make food warm. Heat could make some foods easier to chew, digest, and safely consume. Soon, knowing what to eat wasn't enough. Humans also needed to know exactly how different foods should be prepared. They could peel, crush, pound, soak, dry, and roast. Preparation could completely change how useful a food became. Sometimes even the same plant wasn't one simple answer. One part might be useful, while another was deliberately avoided. And knowing a food wasn't enough. You also had to remember when and where it appeared. After enough experience, the landscape stopped being random. Every hill, tree, river, and patch of ground could hold information. Find food once and you have a meal. Remember where it grows and you may have food again next season. Better still, children could learn those locations without discovering every food source themselves. Humans weren't surviving because every individual knew everything. We survived because knowledge could move from one person to another. So how did ancient humans know what was safe to eat? The truth is, they didn't always know. They learned. They watched animals, trusted familiar patterns, remembered consequences, and slowly turned thousands of observations into survival knowledge. But one person's memory disappears with them. Humans needed a way to keep useful information alive. Teaching solved that problem. A discovery made years earlier could protect someone who wasn't even born when it happened. Without that knowledge, every child would have faced the same terrifying problem, figuring out the entire landscape from scratch. Instead, children could inherit something better than food itself: information about how to find the next meal. That's culture at its most basic. Useful information moving through a group instead of disappearing with one person. And when environments changed, humans could observe again, learn again, and gradually build new knowledge for a new place. So the secret wasn't a perfect prehistoric instinct. It was observation, experience, preparation, memory, and information shared between people. Which means a prehistoric meal wasn't just food. It could contain lessons learned by people who lived generations earlier. Ancient humans didn't survive because they magically knew what was safe. They survived because every generation learned and taught the next one. Every meal represented countless decisions: where to search, what to collect, what to avoid, and how to prepare it. And there wasn't one universal prehistoric menu. Move somewhere new, and the foods and the knowledge needed to find them changed.
Near coastlines, humans could learn an entirely different food landscape, one shaped by tides, beaches, and shallow water. In drier environments, remembering a few reliable plants or seasonal food locations could become incredibly valuable. In richer forests, the opposite problem appeared. Lots of possible foods, but far more things to recognize and remember. That flexibility became one of our greatest advantages. Humans could learn new environments instead of depending on just one food. Of course, none of this made prehistoric life perfectly safe. People could still make mistakes, encounter unfamiliar foods, or lose important knowledge. The difference was that each generation didn't have to begin completely from scratch. They inherited thousands of lessons. Remember those 2 berries? Alone, they're a dangerous mystery. But add generations of shared experience, and suddenly, the choice isn't random.
So, ancient humans didn't have food labels. They had something far older: observation, memory, experience, and people willing to pass it on. And here's something easy to forget. Food knowledge wasn't universal. What worked in one place might be useless somewhere else. So when humans entered unfamiliar territory, survival demanded something remarkable. They had to become students of nature all over again. Too cautious, and you might ignore valuable food. Too reckless, and one bad choice could make you sick. Humans needed balance. Once a food repeatedly proved useful, familiarity mattered. The strange berry eventually became the berry everyone recognized. Think about how powerful that is. A child could know a food was useful without ever being the person who discovered it. Long before books existed, humans were already inheriting information through watching, remembering, demonstrating, and teaching. And this ability didn't stop with dinner. The same system could preserve knowledge about water, tools, animals, shelter, and danger. Maybe humanity's greatest survival tool wasn't something we held in our hands. Maybe it was our ability to keep useful knowledge alive. So put our starving human back in front of those 2 berries. This time, he doesn't have to guess. That's how humans turned a dangerous landscape into something they could understand, not by knowing everything, but by learning together. And food knowledge didn't always stay with one family. People could learn from others, allowing useful information to spread. That meant someone could learn about an unfamiliar food without personally discovering every useful detail through trial and error. Because knowing the plant's name wasn't enough. The important knowledge could be what part to use and what to do with it. Watch carefully, copy the experienced person, remember the process, then one day teach somebody else. Now the discovery could survive far longer than the person who originally made it. That's an extraordinary human advantage. Sometimes the most valuable food lesson was simpler. Don't touch it, don't collect it, and leave it alone. Repeat those lessons across generations, and individual memories become traditions, habits that tell a group what works. So prehistoric survival wasn't always one genius human solving nature alone. Often the real intelligence belonged to the group. A strange plant could begin as a mystery. Observation turned it into a clue. Experience turned the clue into knowledge. And when that knowledge was passed to someone else, it became something even more powerful. Culture gave humans a shortcut. You didn't need to personally discover every danger. You could learn from someone who already had. And imagine those lessons accumulating, not for days or years, but across generation after generation. Eventually, what looked like random wilderness to an outsider could become a landscape filled with recognizable opportunities. But knowing where food grew wasn't enough. You also had to remember when it would actually be there. Arrive too early, and the fruit might not be ready. Arrive too late, and another animal may have found it first. So survival knowledge wasn't just eat this. It could also mean find it here, during this season, and prepare it this way. In a way, the group carried an invisible recipe book, not written on paper, but stored inside people's memories. And no single person needed to remember everything. Different members of the group could carry different pieces of the puzzle. That may have been the real advantage. Humans weren't only learning from nature, they were learning from each other. So how did ancient humans know what was safe to eat? They didn't always know. They observed, they remembered, they prepared, and above all, they taught. But human food knowledge was never complete. Every new environment could introduce plants, animals, and possibilities nobody in the group recognized. And suddenly, the old process began again. Observe carefully, compare what you know, learn, and remember. Survival didn't require knowing everything. It required making better decisions today than the group could make yesterday. One generation inherited old knowledge, added its own experiences, and passed an even larger collection of lessons forward. No labels, no databases, no written manuals, yet an enormous survival system existed inside people's memories. A root on your fire may have been discovered generations earlier by someone whose name nobody remembered anymore. The discovery mattered once. Teaching it mattered again and again, every time another person avoided the same uncertainty. Now return to our hungry human. 2 berries, 2 possibilities, but this time he isn't actually choosing alone. Behind that decision are observations, mistakes, memories, and lessons accumulated long before he ever became hungry. Ancient humans didn't conquer the menu because they never made mistakes. They survived because a lesson learned by one human could eventually become knowledge shared by many. And that may be one of the most human things we've ever done. Success taught humans where dinner was, but failure could teach something equally valuable, where dinner definitely wasn't. And once a warning spread through the group, dozens of people could benefit from an experience only one person had. The smartest part,
Children could learn these lessons years before they ever had to forage completely on their own. Watch enough times, help enough times, remember enough places, and eventually the student becomes the experienced forager. And eventually, that learner could pass the same knowledge forward. The cycle didn't need writing to continue. Over time, a landscape that looked chaotic could become surprisingly readable to someone who knew what to look for. And this wasn't simple knowledge. Understanding dozens of foods, locations, seasons, and preparation methods demanded enormous experience. Humans didn't need sharper claws or stronger jaws to solve this problem. Our advantage was being able to learn and share what worked. So those two berries weren't really a 50-50 guess. Behind the choice stood generations of observation, memory, and teaching. But finding safe food solved only one prehistoric problem. Because you can survive much longer without dinner than without water. So how did ancient humans know which water was safe to drink?